I studied material science at university, Oxford I was. I was agnostic then. Previously I'd been Christian, then I lost faith at university. I went to Africa, I was staying there for some time, and I realized at that time that material science couldn't explain life, couldn't explain consciousness. I went back to UK, I started practicing Zen. I went to Japan, I became a Zen monk, and I practiced there for 2 years, but I wasn't satisfied. I came back, and I'd lost contact with the material. I had no interest in having a job or anything like that on the one hand, and on the other hand, I didn't know what kind of spiritual path to follow. So finally, I cut myself off from everybody. And then I prayed to God, probably the first time in 10 years, if you exist, please help me. And then next day, I was looking for a telephone. I walked and walked and walked in London. And finally, I found a telephone box. It was occupied. So while I was waiting, a devotee came out of an apartment on the other side of the road. So I didn't know, but there were 2 places in London where devotees were living, and I'd stopped right opposite one of them. And then while I was waiting for the phone, one of them came, and we started talking. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm looking for a spiritual path. I think I should chant the holy name, but I don't know what holy name to chant." So he said, "Oh, you should come with me. We do it all the time." So that was it. 3 days later, I was shaved up and off in the Sankirtan van. That was in 73, at the end of 1973. I traveled a lot. Germany, I went to East Africa. I was in Kenya for a couple of years. Came back. I was in UK. Then I went to America to work with the Institute, Bhagavad-gita Institute. Before that, I went to India. I spoke at the Life Comes From Life conference when Srila Prabhupada was there. About a month before he left. And then I came back, then I went to America, working with the Institute. Then I was working as a Gurukul headmaster. Then I went to Scandinavia, back to UK, a lot of traveling. First initiation, I suppose that was 1974. Janmashtami. Quite a lot of us got initiated, not straight from Srila Prabhupada. As far as I remember, it was Dhananjaya who kind of gave us the mantra, on behalf of Prabhupada, I suppose. Second initiation, not that long after that, I think. I went to Germany, maybe when I came back. So that was by tape recorder. So I didn't receive either first initiation or second initiation from Srila Prabhupada personally. When I was in UK, I asked her, there was like a morning walk. We were walking with Prabhupada. So that time, Hamsadutta had introduced distribution of gramophone records. And they were, making huge amounts of money. So I asked Srila Prabhupada whether this is a good idea to sell gramophone records. He says, yes. But he said, but they may not understand, they may take it as sense gratification, so better distribute my books. So that was I think that was quite an important conversation. Devotees were interested in that reply from Srila Prabhupada. In Africa, I had most conversation with Prabhupada in East Africa, but in Kenya, Nairobi, because there weren't so many devotees then, at that time, there. So I went on morning walks with them a couple of times. And after class every time I asked a question, because I heard that he was happy when we asked intelligent questions. Usually he chastised me. One time I asked about spiritual desires. He said, "Why are you asking about spiritual desires when your heart's full of material desires?" He didn't answer anything else. Then another time I said, if we're preaching to Christians or Muslims, should we read their literatures, scriptures? He said, "Christians? Have I ever said?" He turned to Brahmananda was there and Chaivana, they were the GBCs at that time. Turned to them, "Have I ever talked about preaching to Christians?" "No, Srila Prabhupada. No, we are preaching to human beings." There was another time we were on a morning walk and I asked him how we should preach to the leaders. He said, yes, that Prabodhananda Saraswati has said. You go to them with a straw in your mouth, even these first class, loafer class. Go with a straw in your mouth and very humbly you say, my dear sir, I know you're a very learned person, you know everything, you're very, very educated. I just have one request. You please throw it all away, you follow Lord Chaitanya and chant Hare Krishna. So that was on the morning walk. Then we got back to the temple. And after the class that morning, I said, Srila Prabhupada, you explain how to preach to the leaders, so how do you preach to the ordinary people here? He said, yes, that we've explained. And he said he went right through the whole thing. Everyone was laughing, and he was also laughing. He really enjoyed that. Another time I asked him, somebody had suggested that I should get a fruit farm, buy a fruit farm. I didn't have any money, but anyway, they suggested that. So I asked Srila Prabhupada how we should support ourselves. He said, begging, selling books, how else? So I explained, and he said, no, it will not be effective. If you do for others, it will not be effective. And then he explained that we should be self-sufficient. You produce your own wheat, cotton, grains, beans, like this, five, 6 items, and become free from this money situation, economic situation, crazy, what do you call it, money civilization. So I was in Africa, then I went back to UK, and I was at Bhaktivedanta Manor when Srila Prabhupada came last time, 1977. And that time once, Bhakti Srila Damodar, he was then, Brahmachari. He came from America through London to go to India to arrange for the Life Comes from Life festival. So when he arrived, there was a message, I went to the airport to find him, to meet him. So when we arrived, there was a message immediately from Srila Prabhupada that he should go and see Prabhupada immediately. Because Prabhupada was really emphasizing scientific preaching. So we went up, the two of us, and Prabhupada was asking, what he's been doing. Actually, he offered obeisances to Prabhupada. Before he got up even, Prabhupada started preaching about how important this scientific preaching is. And Prabhupada said, he was talking a little, he said, we're not animals, that we deny education. But if you use your education to prove that God doesn't exist, this is a waste of time. He said, people are suffering so much for this. And he was crying like anything. Sarva karana karanam. And then he kind of calmed down, and then he asked Srila Damodar, so who is this? And Srila Damodar said, this is Jnanadas Srila Prabhupada. He's an Oxford scientist. So Prabhupada looked at me and said, so, do you agree? I said, yeah, I agree, Srila Prabhupada. I feel like he put something in my heart at that time. After some time, he returned to India. And I also went to India to take part in that Life Comes from Life conference. So I was in Vrindavan when Srila Prabhupada arrived. I was really shocked. I mean, in UK he was thin. But when he arrived then, he was just like a skeleton. It was terrible. So he was in Krishna Balaram Mandir for I don't know how many months. 3-4 months, I suppose. And we were preparing for the conference. And we go in and be in Srila Prabhupada's rooms. Devotees would be 1 or 2 devotees massaging one arm, 1 or 2 devotees massaging the other arm, like one on each leg. At one time he was lying on his bed. He could practically he couldn't move. And practically he was blind, also physically blind. So he was lying with his head pointing the opposite direction. And I was like right close to my head, right down on the bed. And then he turned his head over and he was like looking right at me, like that distance. So he said, who is this? And I don't know, Bhakti Sarab Damodar or Tamakrishna Maharaj or something. So this is Jnanadas Srila Prabhupada, he's Oxford scientist and Prabhupada. That was it. We had the first day of the conference. He was very worried. He sent over this bust of him in his rooms in Krishna Balaram. So he sent that over so that we would know that he was with us. All day he was asking, how are they getting on, how are they getting on? Because there were all sorts of people, Mayavadis and materialists, all sorts there. So the devotees, they were joking because the Institute scientists were going around in suits. Shirt, tie, trousers, pants. So somebody, I read in a conversation book later, somebody said to Prabhupada, you know, the scientists are dressed in suits. They look, someone had said already, they look like Mormons. And he was going to say that, and Prabhupada cut in, he said, yes, they look very elegant. He was quite happy. So at the end of the conference, first day, straightway there was a message from Srila Prabhupada that we should come and see him straight away. So we didn't have time to shower or change or anything. So we got into his room, and Tama Krishna said, Srila Prabhupada, the scientists have come. They're dressed in suits. And Prabhupada said, oh, bring them chairs. Because he knew it's difficult to sit on the floor with trousers. So there weren't any chairs. Oh, they found 2, and there were about 7 of us. So we had the 2 chairs, and we just pretended to sit on chairs. He couldn't see at that time much. So we pretended to sit on chairs, and he said, so they're all sitting comfortably? Yes, Srila Prabhupada. And then he started preaching and telling us how important this scientific preaching was like that. Now, one thing is how much he loved his devotees. Very intense love. And had so much faith in them. How he pushed on, he was very, very resolute. He knew from way back, he met with Srila Saraswati Prabhupada in 1922. And he knew, like, from that time, what his mission was. And how he continued anyway, so much inconceivable difficulty in America. And after he started the movement also. But at the beginning he was so lonely and just without resources of any kind, completely dependent on Krishna. He didn't want to be there, but anyway he continued. And completely out of his any kind of familiar culture, completely. Alone in New York, practically no money, no friends, no contacts. Like such a different culture. Culture of enjoying, controlling, drugs, everything, drugs, sex, drugs, rock and roll. Whole thing, that was what it was all about. And he came to give something totally different. So he just never gave up. Somewhere he said, I'm not one to be discouraged. He just kept going, kept going. And how much love for Krishna also. If you see there's so many pictures of Srila Prabhupada, and all of them he's got very strong emotions. He's showing very strong feelings, very strong emotions. There's no boring pictures of Prabhupada. Amazing, amazing personality, just constantly. He's like a huge river of emotion, transcendental emotion. There's one really nice video, I think maybe it's in New Vrindavan, I don't know. And he's explaining to somebody, you're not this body, spirit soul is separate from the body, time of death, reincarnation, like that. I mean, it's ordinary stuff, but he's in ecstasy. It's really extraordinary, really extraordinary. Je anilo prema dana karuna prachu